Welcome to the Shelton House at Rural Plains. This property was continuously owned and cared for by 7 generations of the Shelton family of Hanover County for 280 years. Now a unit of Richmond National Battlefield Park, the house and grounds are being restored to the way they looked in 1864, when the Battle of Totopotomoy Creek was fought here. But the history of the property begins well before 1864. In the 17th century, the first 3 Shelton owners of the property were the first, second, and third John Shelton. The second John Shelton was the father of Sarah Shelton, who married Patrick Henry in 1754, connecting the family with the famous orator. We don't know which Shelton was responsible for constructing the house. Architectural evidence suggests it was built about 1725, with alterations made in 1785 by the third John Shelton. By 1830, Edwin Shelton had acquired the property. He was the youngest son of the third John Shelton. Like his father, Edwin made alterations to the house. Some of those are still visible today and may have been made to accommodate a boarding school for young ladies that Edwin opened here in 1837. Edwin and his wife Sarah raised a large family at Rural Plains. He was a prosperous farmer. By 1860, the farm encompassed 815 acres. 31 enslaved men and women lived and worked at Rural Plains. Edwin suffered property losses and damage from both the Confederate and Union armies in 1862 and 1863. But the damage inflicted on the house and farm during the Battle of Totopotomoy Creek was much worse. Late in May 1864, the Union Army occupied the property and placed signal officers on the roof of the house to direct artillery fire on Confederate troops entrenched on the other side of Totopotomoy Creek. When the battle started, Edwin Shelton was away from home and unable to return. Sarah refused to leave the house, despite offers by Union officers to move the family to a place of safety. Instead, Sarah, several daughters, and young son Walter, along with several enslaved women, took refuge in the basement. There they waited out the battle, feeling and hearing every impact of it on their house and farm. Confederate shells struck the house at least 51 times. The damage to the farm was extensive. Earthworks had been dug across the property. Fences and outbuildings had been torn down. Crops in the fields had been trampled, destroyed, and trees in the orchards had been shattered. But despite all this, Rural Plains survived the battle and survived the war, and several more generations of Sheltons continued to live here and work the land. Walter Shelton was the next Shelton to inherit the property, but when he defaulted on a loan, the property was slated to be sold at auction. Walter's son, William, was able to buy the house and 125 acres at the auction in 1903, maintaining the Shelton family's ownership of Rural Plains. William and his wife, Maud, tried a different type of farming at Rural Plains. They established the Rural Plains Nursery in 1927, raising and selling boxwood and other shrubs. William's son, Bill Jr., continued the nursery business and the family's longtime stewardship of Rural Plains. Bill and his wife, Holly, conveyed the property to the Totopotomoy Creek Battlefield at Rural Plains Foundation in October of 2007. Bill was the last Shelton to live at Rural Plains and died here in 2006, just a month before a ceremony was held conveying this property to the National Park Service. When the house is restored and the grounds with it, visitors will be able to see what the property looked like in 1864. But that is just one of the many layers of history at Rural Plains.
During the American Revolution, Hanover County would be instrumental in helping the American war effort through manpower, through the troops that were raised here. As a matter of fact, Hanover County boys, recruits that were raised here in the county, would go on to form the nucleus of the Virginia Continental Infantry Line. These were the hard-bitten, well-trained regulars. Hanover County men would help staff the 5th and the 14th Virginia Infantry units as part of the Virginia Line. But there were militia units as well. There's a rather famous incident regarding a Hanover County militia regiment. It goes back to late April 1775. You know, at that point, word of the battles of Lexington and Concord had not even reached the Virginia colony yet. But Virginia's royal governor, John Murray, Lord Dunmore, made the decision to remove the colony's gunpowder store from the magazine in Williamsburg. And that was actually witnessed by several townspeople. And word spread around town like wildfire, and all through the countryside and through really the eastern part of the colony. Virginians were mad because this was Virginia property. And committees of safety would meet. Counties talked about mustering their militia units. There were some words of caution preached by people like Peyton Randolph and even George Washington, the long-time colonel of the Virginia Regiment. But in the end, Hanover County in early May decided to mobilize an independent militia company commanded by Captain Samuel Meredith. Now, Samuel Meredith happened to be the brother-in-law of our own Patrick Henry. And Meredith steps down as the commander of that militia unit to allow Henry to assume command. Henry marches the militia unit to the outskirts of Williamsburg, because what are they after? Either the Crown needs to return the powder or at least pay the Virginians for it. And by the time Henry's force gets down to the outskirts of Williamsburg, Lord Dunmore has seen the light. He doesn't return the powder, but he does reimburse the colony to the tune of about 300 pounds sterling. So there's no fighting in this incident. No shots were fired. But this is very important because it's considered Virginia's first action militarily against the Crown in the American Revolution.
During the American Revolution, one of the most iconic weapons was the American long rifle. Now, the American long rifle came to these colonies in the early 1700s or late 1600s through German immigrants. And when they came, they made a European-style rifle, very similar to this. In fact, if you had a rifle made for you in Europe, this would have been similar to a rifle that you would have made, a short barrel, whereas the American long rifle, its barrel got longer over the years. We're not sure why. But only in America does this long rifle show up. And one of the advantages of a rifle, although it is slower to reload than a musket, is that it is accurate. A good rifleman can hit a target, a man-sized target, at 300 yards. And this does make a difference in some of the battles. Both sides actually used rifles.
You know, in the spring and summer of 1781, not only American armies, but British armies would march across Hanover County and made Hanover County one of the most active counties in Virginia during the American Revolution. In March of that year, just a few months after the traitor Benedict Arnold came to Richmond and burned it, George Washington is going to send a small force, about 1,200 men, commanded by the young Frenchman, the Marquis de Lafayette. He's going to send the Frenchman down here to try to restore order, but hopefully capture the traitor, Benedict Arnold, which unfortunately he's unable to do. By May, things take an ugly turn for the Americans when the British arrive. Lord Cornwallis, Charles Earl Cornwallis, will arrive from the Carolinas with about 7,000 troops. And he sees Lafayette's small force as a threat and decides he needs to eliminate it. Now, Lafayette will be reinforced. He'll have about 4,000 troops throughout the summer. But Lafayette is going to stay just ahead of Cornwallis. As a matter of fact, he doesn't want to give battle. He sends a letter to George Washington, and I'm going to paraphrase, but in it he basically tells the general that his force was not even big enough to get beat. That's what he's dealing with. But they will head north, traversing through Hanover County, to the banks of the North Anna River. Lafayette's force will cross the North Anna. Cornwallis will halt his force there on the shores of the North Anna and then decide to turn. He'll head back southeast towards Williamsburg and ultimately to Yorktown, and we know what happens there. Now, Lafayette will recross and shadow Cornwallis all the way down the peninsula. And this is 83 years before Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee and their troops would contest over the same acreage.
Well, hello. My name is Patrick Henry, and I would love to welcome you all here to one of my favorite places in Virginia, and that is the home of John and Eleanor Shelton. I was born a few miles east of here at Studley Plantation. My father had an older son, his name was William, and a half-son named John Jr. After I was born, my mother and father would proceed to have 7 daughters. Well, naturally, being young and like we were, we would roam the area, and we would work our way up to this beautiful home known as the Shelton House. The Sheltons, Mr. John and Eleanor Shelton, they had 4 children. Eleanor was their oldest daughter, Sarah, which I would belovedly later call Sally. They had 2 sons, John and William. Well, we would play together like any young children would and roam the woods until about the age of 14. My dad had to move out of Studley, and he moved about 20 miles away. So this almost cut my time with Sally short until my father opened a store for my brother and I, and we were able to move back in, and instead of paying room and board, we were able to live for free back at Studley with my half-brother. Well, during this time now, I'm about 16 years old, and I wanted to see my Sally. So I would work my way uphill, either using his horse or buggy. But nevertheless, we became very close. During the holidays, such as Christmas and St. Andrew's Day, we would come up here amongst the celebrations and want a little peace and quiet, and we would walk down the trails and sit by the creek for hours listening to the birds and making plans. Well, we decided that we wanted to get married, but there lies a problem. I was 18, she was 16. We were both too young to sign whatever papers needed to be married, and we needed our parents' consent. This was a problem. To Mr. Shelton, I was not very stable. I had no experience in business. I had nothing to do. I had no job, no plans, and my store had failed. So I don't really blame Mr. Shelton for having doubts about me. But on the other hand, my parents were not real happy with my choice either, because they wanted me to marry up. Although the Sheltons were relatively well off, he wanted me to do better. But they really didn't have a choice, because we had an argument that they couldn't fight against, so they relented and we were married. Well, I tried to be a farmer, and that did not work out. So that's 2 things I failed at, a storekeeper and a farmer, and then my house burned down. So Mr. Shelton was kind enough to offer us to move with my little family to his tavern known as Shelton Tavern. Well, I would work for him in the bars and in the stables, doing whatever he needed me to do, until I realized that across the street from this tavern was the Hanover County Courthouse. It was through listening to these arguments in the court and talking to the lawyers, I felt like I could be an attorney. Well, I was able to pass the bar, get my license, start a practice where I would make a little bit of money, enough to, with my father's help, build a home in Louisa County. Well, it was during this time I had several notable cases. I made more money, and I was able to buy one of the nicest homes in this part of Hanover County, known as Scottstown. We would move in Scottstown and live there happily, but during this time, Sarah began to show signs of illness. She became very ill. During this time at Scottstown, our last son was born. His name was Eddie, but we affectionately called him Nettie. Well, Sarah continued to show worsening signs of a mental disorder. Eventually, she passed away. And after this was over, I probably did not have a whole lot more contact with the rest of the Shelton family. Thank you all very much for joining us, and I really appreciate seeing you.
Good afternoon. My name is Miss Bernard, and I'm here to speak to you about the opportunities you have to educate your daughter here at our school in Hanover County, just a day's ride outside of Richmond City. This is a new school formed by Mr. Shelton here at Rural Plains. For a young woman to be considered marriageable material in this time, she must be well educated. In the last century, it was considered unseemly for a young woman to have an educated mind. It was considered a waste, and education was erroneously blamed for impurity within one's mind. But we are a young republic, and we have come to realize within the recent decades that the moral compass of our young country is guided by mothers in the home. And so your daughter can receive proper instruction in literature, world history, natural sciences, and mathematics, in addition to the art of conversation, music, languages, etc. This way, she can raise her children to be fruitful members of society in our young republic. Women, and mothers particularly, guide the moral compass of our country. In order for young men especially to be great philanthropists and leaders, it is necessary that they be raised by an educated woman. So your daughter will receive the proper training to be a good wife and mother. The older children will teach the younger ones, therefore giving them training in how to be proper mothers, educating their young. And the younger children will receive the benefit of that education and instruction. For a reasonable fee, your daughter can come and stay here. And in between her lessons on geography and etc., she will learn proper household management. Do be forewarned, any child who neglects her duties or refuses to complete her lessons in a timely manner will be punished. For corporal punishment is considered the best way to purify hearts and minds. A petulant and disagreeable young child is doomed to be a lonely and sad spinster, causing misery to all around her. So to avoid that circumstance for your daughter, do please direct your inquiries here to Mr. Edwin Shelton of Rural Plains in Hanover.
When the Battle of Totopotomoy Creek occurred, artillery played a major part in this battle. Placed at the rear of the Rural Plains house, the Union Army positioned 6 mortars and eventually 24 cannons that were positioned to aim at the enemy. On the other side of the creek, the Confederate artillery, probably using 12-pound Napoleon cannons, were aiming and hitting this house because 2 Union officers were standing on top of the house with signal flags to help direct where the artillery would land hitting the Confederate Army. This house was hit over 50 times by Confederate cannonballs. Eventually, the Rural Plains roof was burning and blown apart.
We're standing on a walking trail south of the Shelton House. Directly behind us is Totopotomoy Creek, and behind us are Union earthworks dug in late May 1864. When Ulysses S. Grant and the U.S. Army crossed the Pamunkey River to the north of us, they had another obstacle to contend with, Totopotomoy Creek. Now, it wasn't a substantial body of water, but steep hillsides and marshes and swamps made it a formidable position for Confederate General Robert E. Lee's army south of here. It appears that Ulysses S. Grant was interested in making a full-out attack to test the Confederate lines to see if he could push straight through to the Confederate capital. But at this point in the war, veterans on both sides were really good at building earthworks. It was said that if a Civil War unit occupied a position for 8 hours, it was already impossible to attack it, that they had already thrown up fortifications. And that's what Francis Channing Barlow's division faced here in late May of 1864. When he arrived here on the 29th, Barlow wrote to his superiors, "The western bank of the creek is held by the enemy in force. They have a line of works on the bank well filled with infantry in line of battle." But in his usual brave and aggressive manner, he added in a later message, I do not believe assaults upon entrenched lines are likely to be successful, but we will cheerfully try it if ordered. Grant did want to test the strength of the Confederate line. On May 30th, Barlow ordered Colonel John R. Brooks' brigade down the slope behind me towards Totopotomoy Creek, which you can walk by and tour today, thanks to the Park Service. His men successfully crossed the creek under heavy fire, losing about 100 soldiers, but they had to retreat back to this direction after dark, to these hastily dug trenches and rifle pits behind me, still visible in the woods today. Now, the next day, on May 31st, Barlow renewed his advance, even capturing the first line of Confederate defenses and holding a portion of the south bank of the creek. But it came at a cost. Now, to my left, this direction where the creek turns north, the attack was led by the 2nd New York Heavy Artillery, which had little experience but was a huge regiment that had just come down from the defenses of Washington, D.C. They were quickly pinned down in the marsh and the swamps and were cut up with enemy fire between the lines. Lieutenant Robert Robertson, who was acting as a guide on their behalf, rode back up the slope towards Brigadier General Miles, their immediate commander, and General Barlow, and Robertson asked if they could pull back, that it was turning into a slaughter in the creek bottom. However, Barlow, in his typical aggressive way, said, "Charge them with a yell," basically saying, "Don't pull back." Now, Robertson could never deliver that order. He was seriously wounded riding back down the slope towards the 2nd New York, and eventually the attack fizzled and they pulled back. And if you read Robert Robertson's account of his experience at Rural Plains, it's really fascinating. Barlow knew that further attacks were fruitless, however, based on this, and he said as much to high command. Meanwhile, Grant and Lee both turned their focus towards the next major action of the Overland Campaign east of here at Cold Harbor. Both armies began to shift to the east. Barlow's men suffered around 300 casualties here between May 29th and May 31st, 1864, but the loss of those men would quickly be overshadowed when 12,000 U.S. soldiers became casualties at Cold Harbor a few days later.
The women of Shelton House are representative of the women who faced shortages and the need to generate creativity and find items that would replace what they could no longer get.
Miss Shelton! Miss
Yes,
Shelton!
Miss Bonnie!
Oh, Sarah, I'm so glad it's you down here.
You made the trip up here through those soldiers?
I did. Well, I was quick stepping it through the soldiers, I can tell you.
Well, I'm glad you're here safely. And if you need to stay, we've got plenty of room.
Bless you, Sarah. I came by because I heard that Mr. Shelton had been to town and might have gotten some supplies. And the boy's coming home. Will's coming home on leave. And I wanted so to make him some cake or something sweet, or something he would enjoy.
Well, our trip to Richmond was not very fruitful. Many of the supplies we wanted to get were not available.
No flour?
No flour as we know it. He came back with some rice flour. I've just done a measure to take over to Big Sis to see if she can make some mush bread for us. I was looking up the recipe to see if it would even work with what we're familiar with. I'm willing to let you have that measure and I can get...
Well, I know right now, Sarah, that money's no good and nobody's to buying anybody's jewelry anymore, but I had held on to some items that I thought maybe we could barter with. I've got paper.
Paper, such wealth.
I know. I was wondering if maybe you would consider maybe bartering for some flour and maybe some sweetener for this paper.
I'll give you that measure of flour like we talked about for one piece of paper. Mr. Shelton doesn't know I've been pulling the wallpaper from behind the draperies in the parlor.
Oh, Sarah, the things we have to do now.
Yes, I will be more than happy to take a piece of paper from you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I had some other items that I wasn't sure. They're getting awfully scarce, but I had 2 store-bought candles left.
Well, we've been able to make some light with all those gumballs in the backyard and put them into this candle.
Sarah, you're a wonder. How did you come up with that idea?
Well, when we're trapped in the cellar, we get to talking and We come up with
It's
these ideas.
been hard down here, isn't it? I also have, when things were a little bit better, I made some sweet smelling soap. Some ladies might really like this. I'd be willing to trade for any other ingredients you have.
I don't have the sweetener. This is all the sugar and honey I've got left. I'm going to tell you to take your candles to Miss Donna because I know she's got some honey. And maybe she'll trade those candles for the honey. What I will do is trade some of our walnut ink for that bar of soap so that when your boy goes back, you can write.
Bless you, you are so kind.
The women were very creative. They lacked many of the things that the boys on the field thought they had back at home and did not. So with a few fresh vegetables that the soldiers didn't find, or with bartering what one had and the other didn't, we were able to survive.
Slavery during the antebellum period in Hanover was very similar to slavery throughout the South. Enslaved black people made up the majority of residents in the county from 1830 to 1870. Again, like the rest of the South, there's not a consistent picture of how they were treated and what their daily lives were like. Most of those here at Rural Plains had agricultural tasks. They cultivated crops, repaired farming implements, and maintained the animals. Or they were domestics. They cooked, they cleaned, they made and repaired garments, and they took care of the white children, sometimes to the detriment of their own children. The owners of Rural Plains would have been among the white elite in Hanover. The majority of slaveholders owned one or two people, but between 1850 and 1860, the census tells us that the Shelton family enslaved 42 and 37 people respectively. According to sources, there were 8 quarters right here where I'm standing, and the remains have been located, and they will be able to tell us more about the black people who lived here. For the white family, this property or this space where the quarters were was like the rest of the outbuildings on their property, nothing particularly special. But for the enslaved, these were the places that they could call their own to a limited extent. This is where they built some semblance of a life. They socialized, they worshiped, they ate, they raised children as circumstances allowed. They often gave themselves different names than the names the master had given them. In short, they made a life with what they had, but this was not the life they wanted. While some masters and mistresses might have been better than others, there was no such thing as a good master. And how do we know this? All along, black people self-emancipated at the first opportunity. This was never truer than during the Civil War. To the surprise and consternation of white owners, thousands of black people walked off plantations. They bided their time and waited for the right moment. Sometimes when the owners were preoccupied with their declining economic situation during the war, that was the time to leave. Sometimes when the Union Army was nearby, they left, like Billy and Frank, who were enslaved here at Rural Plains. Regardless of what some Northerners may have believed, black people always believed that the war was about them, and if the North won, they would be free. At the end of the war, most newly freed black men and women chose to remain in Hanover County. It was home. But they remained on their own terms. They sought paying jobs, they founded churches, and they worshiped as they saw fit. They educated themselves and their children. They wanted to live as free people among free people, and they did.
The Rural Plains Foundation is a great example of what happens when a group of citizens get together to do some good in the world. The foundation was founded in 2012, now consists of 13 board members and hundreds of supporters. Our goal is to help the National Park Service preserve, maintain, and improve the Shelton House and the surrounding property that altogether comprises Rural Plains. It does this in a number of ways. It provides research assistance for ongoing projects. The foundation does public tours through the summer and fall months of the house. It provides public lecture and other public gatherings, the opportunity to people to come on site and see what's going on here and learn from experts about more of the history of this area and of the Commonwealth. And perhaps most importantly, the Rural Plains Foundation assists the National Park Service by providing valuable resources to do particular projects on the site. A recent example of that is the replacement of the rear door to the house, a much needed project that the Rural Plains Foundation was able to help with. Here in the Shelton House, we see evidence all around us of the hard work and dedication of the National Park Service and the volunteers in doing the preservation, maintenance, and improvement work that's so important. The Rural Plains Foundation is a way for the community to focus its energy and its resources and make sure that Rural Plains meets its full potential as a historical and cultural resource. Join us in our efforts. You can find us on Facebook and on the web at ruralplains.org. Thanks for listening.